he's vocal. Beloved, let me say this to you. You've got to know how to lift your voice to God in prayer. You've got to know how to lift your voice to God in prayer when you get desperate enough. Life has a way of causing us to get so comfortable that we get silent and we do not talk to God like we ought to talk to him. But Bartimaeus teaches us that when life takes you to a place of desperation, you've got to be willing to vocalize your request to God. But then not only is it visible, vocal, but it's volitional. Volitional simply would suggest it's based upon his own personal desire, his personal determination. Nobody has to prod or push Bartimaeus to cry out to the Lord. When you get desperate enough, you don't need your prayer partner to encourage you to pray. You don't need your friend to tell you to pray. You don't need your family to tell you to pray. You don't need anybody to tell you to pray. Once you get desperate enough and life takes you to such a difficult place, you will take it upon yourself to go to God in prayer. You've got to have this level of volitional, this mindset that you're simply going to say, God, I need you, and I don't need anybody to tell me I need you. I'm desperate right now, and I'm willing to go and ask you now. The text says that he cried out to the Lord, but watch this. He's diligent because the text shows us in the next few verses, verses 48, 49, and 50, watch what happens. He continues to cry to the Lord. He is diligent in his crying to the Lord, but he has to overlook his opposition, and then there is an opportunity that's open unto him, and then he has to overcome his obstacle. Now, in the text, it says there was a crowd that was sternly telling him that he ought to be quiet. How many people or what are you dealing with that's telling you you ought to be quiet? Number one, the enemy will tell you you ought to be quiet, because the enemy does not want you to go to God in prayer, because the enemy understands that if you go to God in prayer, God will hear your faintest cry and he will answer by and by. So the enemy wants to try and get you to hush your voice. But not only will the enemy do that, you have to be careful of who you let get in your ear, because there will be people who will try to discourage you of going to God in prayer. In fact, they'll tell you to try this. Have you read your horoscope? They'll ask you, have you had your palm read? Have you had tarot card reading? None of that will help you. But you've got to know how to overlook the opposition, because you will always have an opposing force trying to block and hinder your prayer life. If it's nothing more than a cell phone ringing, if it's nothing more than a text message, if it's nothing more than an email, you have to overlook the opposition, because there's always something that's going to try and divert your attention from the divine. But if you want God to answer your prayers, you've got to know how to block out all of the other noises and all of the other voices that would hinder you from getting to God. But then the Lord opens the opportunity for him, because the text says that as Jesus passes by, the Bible says he stopped and he sends for him. Let me tell you what happens when you diligently cry to the Lord. What the Lord will do, he will stop and he will come and see about you. That's why you got to keep on crying. That's why you got to keep on praying. Even if God doesn't respond right when you think he should respond, you've got to know how to continue in prayer. Anybody in here, you've ever been praying and it seems like God was not answering, God was not listening, and you almost quit praying, but the moment you kept praying, it seemed as if God heard your cry. That moment God answered you. You've got to understand, God does not work in your chronological or on your chronological timeline. God works in Kairos. He works in his own time and his own season. That's why you got to keep on praying, because you don't know what season God is going to answer you in. So therefore, you got to keep going to the Lord, keep going to the Lord, keep going to the Lord, despite how challenging it is, despite how many people are telling you you ought to quit, because you have to understand you've got to overcome and overlook the opposition. You've then got to open your eyes and receive the opportunity, but then you got to overcome your obstacle. Notice what the text says. The text says that he threw off his cloak and he went to Jesus.